So tonight, we're going to talk about relationship. And of course, when you talk about relationship, you've got to refer to Krishnamurti, because I just think he gives us the best understanding of relationship. And so he says, relationship means contact, communion.
Does everyone have his muted?
Oh, Paul just said, is everyone muted? I think. Okay. So, this is Krishnamurti now. To live is to be related. It is only in the mirror of relationship that I understand myself, which means that I must be extraordinarily alert in my thoughts, feelings, and actions in relationship. Have you ever noticed, he goes on, that we build a fence around ourselves, a fence of self-protection, a fence to ward off any hurts, a barrier between you and the other, between you and the family, and so on. Why do we do that? Is that not self-interest? And this self-interest must inevitably bring about fragmentation. Whether you have a very deep, intimate relationship with your wife or your husband or a girl or a boy and so on, where there is division, there must be fragmentation and there must be conflict. That's a law, whether you like it or not. That is a law. He's saying where there is fragmentation, there is division, and where there is division, he's saying there must inevitably be conflict.
But what does he mean by fragmentation?
Breaking up. See, relationship, he's saying, is a contact, is communion. Communion means union, oneness. But he's saying in relationship, we tend to split off. It's,
I see.
you see,
a fragment instead of a whole.
That's right. We become a fragment instead of a whole. He goes on to say, dependence destroys love. It must ever create attachment, possessiveness, from which arise jealousy, envy, and those conflicts with which we are all too familiar. Where there is dependence and attachment, there love is not. Now, when he talks about attachment here, he's talking about a clinging dependency. A clinging dependency. In understanding relationship, we will find that the cause of disturbance and pain lies in depending, just a minute, lies in depending, well, when you see that, can you just close that, please? In understanding relationship, we will find that the cause of disturbance and pain lies in depending on another for our inward sustenance and happiness. Relationship then becomes merely a means for self-gratification, which breeds attachment and fear. Relationship is a process of self-revelation. Relationship is as a mirror in which you begin to discover yourself. And this is essential for Krishnamurti, that when we use relationship as a mirror, that's when we really begin to see who we are, by our reactions, by our, he goes on, by your tendencies, your pretensions, your selfish and limited motives, your fears, and so on. In relationship, if you are aware, you will find that you're being exposed, which causes conflict and pain. The thoughtful person welcomes this exposure to bring about order and clarity, to free his thoughts and feelings from isolation and self-enclosing tendencies. But most of us try to seek comfort and gratification in relationship. We do not desire to be revealed to ourselves. We do not wish to study ourselves as we are. So relationship becomes wearisome and we seek escapes. We seek peace in a relationship. And if we do not find it, then we bring about changes that will gratify us and find what we seek, which is dull comfort or some distraction to cover up our hollow emptiness and aching fears. But relationship will ever be painful, a constant struggle, till out of it comes deep self-knowledge. With deep self-knowledge, there is inexhaustible love. So, obviously, it's very clear what he's saying here. He's saying that in relationship, you get to know who you really are. You know,
you have the opportunity.
You have the opportunity, right. You have the opportunity to get to know who you really are. I mean, I can think I'm great, but in relationship, that feeds back or mirrors back to me who I really am. So he's saying that it's such a beautiful tool, it's such a beautiful mirror to finally get to know the me in action. The me in action. And remember, this whole teaching of non-duality is about being able to understand the me, to see it, and to be able to pull a plug on it so that we're not acting from this ego-driven, self-centered me.
So he's talking about practicing intimacy as a high art.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Rather than what most people go into intimacy with the idea that they're not going to have changes and they want to keep their racket going and they don't want to be confronted about it.
That's right.
And if you confront me about it, even gently, I get very defensive and start tap dancing.
Well, yes, and that's, dear. That's why he says, you know, we don't really want to know who we are.
Right.
And as soon as you expose me, hold up a mirror, I'm gonna do something.
Balk.
I'm gonna balk, or I'm going to run away, or I'm going to
turn the tables and make it about you.
Right. Well, all the things that we do so that we don't have to be confronted with who and what we are in that moment. He says, we love with our minds and not with our hearts. It is the mind that clings, that is envious, that holds and destroys. Our life is dominated by the physical centers and by the mind. Our mind is dominated by this center, this me. Can the mind, whose very essence is of time, you know, the past and the future. That's where our mind always goes. Yeah, that's how we tend to live, either in the past or projecting into the future. Can the mind, whose very essence is of time, catch love, which is its own eternity? It can't. He goes on. Life is a movement in relationship, but in that relationship there is disorder. We must examine closely why we live in such disorder in our relationships with each other, however intimate or superficial. To understand the full meaning of relationship with each other, however close, however distant, we must begin to understand why the brain creates images. We have images about ourselves and images about others. Why is it that each one has a peculiar image and identifies himself with that image? Is the image necessary? Does it give one a sense of security? Does not the image bring about the separation of human beings? So this is a key. And actually, I have to tell you, Paul and I wrote about it in our book, The Marriage Spirit. We called it imageless perception, because we did discover in working with couples that how they were relating to each other was by the images they formed of each other. Not the physical images, the psychological images, the concepts they developed about each other. So we also asked the question, is it possible for a relationship to have imageless perception? Is it possible not to form a concept about another person? Is it possible for us to see each other new and come to each other new without the preconceived image, concept, picture that we have of each other? And here Krishnamurti is saying, these images are what the major problem is. We have an image about ourselves and we have an image about the other person. And if you reinforce a positive image about me, well, then I love you. But if you put a pin in that image, well, then I don't love you. So the key also is to see that that's what's happening. And that's why he says relationship becomes a mirror in which you begin to see that that's what's going on.
It's interesting, we were sitting with a couple where the wife actually had made some of the changes that came out in the therapy that she needed to make, and the husband didn't seem to really recognize the changes that she was making, and was continuing to relate to her as though she had not made the changes we had all agreed would be good for both of them to make. And she at one point turned to him and said, you know, you've got me so figured out, you won't let me be new. And she was saying that, you know, you've got this image of me that's so fixed that you're not even able to see that I'm not that person. I'm really showing up differently in a more positive way that we all agreed upon, but it's not making a dent in the image that you have of me. And it was a kind of a profound moment, and it led to this us developing this idea of having imageless perception. then if you don't have an image of me, you see me fresh and clear in the moment as I actually am. As soon as you have an image, that image is transposed between us. And everything that you say, everything you do, I filter through that image. And it distorts reality.
Well, you know, it's interesting because Krishnamurti also points to relationship not only with another person, but relationship with your work, relationship with ideas, relationship with art, your relationship with all those elements, those variables, those things that our life consists of. And he begs you to ask yourself the question, well, what is my relationship? So in other words, to an idea. Well, if I come to that with an image of what that idea should be or what it should be pointing to, if I come with an image about what this music should sound like or what this art should reflect, then I'm not really free to see what it is in the moment. And this is really hard because we're so conditioned to incorporate an opinion, a conclusion, an image about what a certain thing should be, that it's difficult for us to come to it new and fresh.
Well, making images is probably clearly a brain function that serves us well in the evolutionary process. But in an intimate relationship, in our close relationships, making images of people gets in the way of having true, honest, authentic interactions.
Well, those are the psychological images we create.
Well, in relationship.
And in relationship, I mean, you need to have an image, otherwise how could you see anybody? Or you couldn't. How could you see anything if you didn't have an image? However, it's the psychological image that gets us into difficulties. He says, relationship based on mutual need brings only conflict. So, in psychology, in couples work, it is usually said that a good relationship is based on a mutual meeting of needs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know,
part of it, sure.
It's part of a healthy relationship is the mutual meeting of needs. Krishnamurti here says, relationship based on mutual need brings only conflict. However interdependent we are on each other, we are then using each other for a purpose, for an end. With an end in view, relationship is not.
Well, hold on a second. So in the context that we're talking about, if I have an image of myself as not being good enough, as being less than, well, then I have a need in this relationship for you to be constantly sending me messages that bolster myself and make me feel good about myself. If you offer some criticism, valid as it may be, my first instinct is going to hear it as a blame or a criticism that I'm not good enough. That's the need I think Krishnamurti is talking about.
Well, yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a mute. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. To validate the good image that I have about myself.
Yeah.
So he says, when we use another, we have only the picture of the end to be gained. The end, the gain prevents relationship. It prevents communion. In the usage of another, however gratifying and comforting it may be, there is always fear. To avoid this fear, we must possess. From this possession, there arises envy, suspicion, and constant conflict, and such a relationship can never bring about happiness. Mm-hmm. Well, there comes fear because there's a dependency. I depend on you to validate me. And with that dependency, there comes fear. When you use another for your need, psychologically, in actuality, there's no relationship at all, because you really have no contact with the other, no communion with the other. How can you have communion with the other when the other is used as a piece of furniture for your convenience and your comfort? So it is essential to understand the significance of relationship in daily life. Before I continue, is there any?
So how does this strike you? What are you hearing here? Any reactions?
I think it's very self-evident that relationship is a critical way that we get to see ourselves and to relate with each other, to find that non-dual, even though we're living with me and other, but to make that work is all what this is about. And it only opens it up for me to find out who I am too. So to do that with clarity and with that awareness of our needs or your needs, or how to see people fresh and how to keep out of that rut is the challenge.
Yeah, so this is a model of relationship as a vehicle for growth, rather than as a vehicle for maintaining the status quo of my preferred image of myself.
Well, for growth in terms of knowing the workings of the me and being able to pull a plug on it.
Right. That's the gift relationship offers, if you have that idea of it and you're open to it and ready for it.
And if both people are ready for it too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Not just one. You can't do it in a vacuum.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, well, if the other person isn't ready for it, then there is no, where's the relationship? There's no communion.
There's no communion, right. Anyone else want to share something before we go on with Krishnamurti's observations? Okay, what else is he offering?
He's saying, in the process of understanding yourself, not in isolation, but in relationship, you will find that there is a deep, lasting transformation in which the usage of another as a means for your own psychological gratification has come to an end.
Say that again.
In the process of understanding yourself, not in isolation, but in relationship, you will find, once you really begin to understand yourself, you will find there is a deep, lasting transformation in which the usage of another for the means of your own psychological gratification has come to an end. Right? I mean, once you see it,
right,
you're not going to keep doing it. Or you might, but you probably won't. There is only one fundamental revolution. This revolution is not of idea. It is not based on any pattern of action. This revolution comes into being when the need for using another ceases. This transformation is not an abstraction, a thing to be wished for, but an actuality which can be experienced as we begin to understand the way of our relationship. The fundamental revolution may be called love. It is the only creative factor in bringing about transformation in ourselves and so in society. So here he says, when you're really able to do this, to work at this, to have an awareness of it, to give your attention to it, because it's important to you. I mean, obviously, if it's not important, you're not going to do it. But if it's really, really important to you, if it's really important to you to live a life that's not ego-driven, a life that's much more peaceful, with much more clarity, then relationship is one path toward this. And it's an important path. And you could use it as a path.
Well, but just at a level before that, most partners and couples, they don't want to fight. They don't want to be fighting in their relationship, but they don't. The solution is not wanting to have a deep personal transformation. To the solution to their fights is showing the other person how they're wrong. For most people, right? They're operating at that kind of a level. We're talking about again, using relationship as practicing intimacy at the highest level, which is a vehicle for personal growth. Most people want to have peace in their relationship. They don't want to fight, but they want that peace to come without having
to change.
To change, exactly, right.
Without having to change or
right,
let go.
Right.
To
it's
let
not
go.
Me, it's you.
Right. So here again, see, Krishnamurti really, in almost all his writing, says that there cannot be a fundamental change in society until there is a psychological revolution. Because it doesn't matter, you can use this system of government or that system, you can apply these principles or those ideas, but he said there won't be a fundamental change, a fundamental transformation, unless there is a revolution psychologically. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, don't you? Because we haven't changed as human beings psychologically very much. We've changed in a lot of ways. Technology, it's amazing what we've accomplished. But as human beings, psychologically, inwardly, we're the same. There hasn't been much progress because we're still operating from this me.
A survival mentality where it's self-interest, self-expansion, and self-protection.
Right.
And whether that's in a relationship, between intimate partners, if that's the mode of thought that's operating, or if you look globally at the level of consciousness, if that's where the level of consciousness levels off at, where it's still predominantly a survival mentality based on self-interest, self-expansion, self-protection, then you get a lot of conflict. You get division and conflict.
Right.
Because it's my self-interest against yours, and there's the division right there.
The individual is really, it's not a separation between the individual and society. I mean, society is made up of individuals. So that's why, you know, we look at what's going on in the world and we say, oh, how horrible. But how much of what's outer is inner? And are we able to see it in each of us, in ourselves? And to the degree that we're able to see it in ourselves and free ourselves of it, then there's some space for change, for transformation. Even if it's just on the individual level, it does have a ripple effect eventually. And I think that's what he's been trying to say in all his writings. What do you think? Do you agree, do you think that relationship indeed can be at least one path to transformation?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
I said yes. No, it's a big transformation. I don't think it's with an intimate relationship, but I think it's with a lot of relationships, you know. If I really want a good relationship with my friend Mary, let's say, you know,
Yes.
we have, which I do have actually, but we have to be in truth with each other, right? And it's
Right.
and I don't know, and show, I find, you know, I have to show myself, and it takes work. It takes, I don't know, we've, like, I'm thinking of this one friend of mine, and, you know, we really, we've been friends for so long, and I think a lot of that is because we've had the commitment, and we call each other on things, or we, you know, do you know what I'm saying? So, and then relationship, my primary relationship, God knows I love what, Paul, what you said, intimacy is a high art. I mean, I think that it's beautiful, and it is, and can be very uncomfortable sometimes for me to see this little me who comes up, you know, at times it's like, oh my God.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that was a good point too, that there are so many relationships that we have. So whether it's with the woman in the grocery store at the checkout counter, or the postman, or our child, or partner, or colleague at work, I mean, there are just so many relationships, and we can take each one of those as clearly and deeply as we are able, and that's really the challenge, is to approach each one with really finding out who is this person, and allowing ourselves to disappear a little bit, so that we don't keep that strong self-image as a wall, so that people can't get past that too.
Well, you know, it's interesting because when you're really connected to someone, when there's that sense of communion, that oneness, there isn't a sense of a me. It's like it fades. There's just that sense of, it's like a heart to heart. You know, he said, we love with our minds, not with our hearts. But when you're in communion with someone, then you're loving with your heart. Then it's not the mind that's doing the work. The mind kind of fades away. What is the mind? It's all the thoughts we have and the experiences we have. But when you love someone deeply and you're really connected to that person, I know for myself, with my very best friend, who's right there, it's just a feeling of newness each time. And there's just such a feeling of connectedness and love. And the me, it seems to fade. And that's part of why it feels so good. You know, it's almost like a sexual experience, because in sex, you know, that's why sex is so important to most people, because the me fades. I mean, it may just be for a second or two, but it's not there. And that's what we're all really wanting, to experience being without this ego.
Unself-conscious being.
Unself-conscious being.
Eddie, also, it's a feeling of transcendence.
Yes.
Because we're so, speaking personally, the person I love outside of my family most of this life, when we're connected, which we always are, it's transcendent. We are just blissful.
Yes.
You know, and there's no me, there's no you, but we are lucky enough to be involved in a relationship where both of us are really thinking people and not crazy.
Right.
What if the person is involved in a relationship where they're trying to get feedback from their partner, but the partner is giving them distorted feedback?
Yes.
And how does one get out of that? And one point also, I think the person, Paula, I have a little bit of a difference here. The person who is feeling not good enough doesn't want the partner to praise them. She wants the partner or he to validate their feelings of not good enough. And that's why they're involved with people who are not good for them. Now, how does one get out of it? That's the hard part. When you're involved with someone who's validating your most, I wouldn't say base, but the worst parts of yourself.
Yes.
How does one get out of it?
Yes, yes. Well, that's an interesting question, because that almost becomes like an addiction.
Yeah.
And right? And so, and that's why they say, you know, like a lot of these women that I work with, they keep picking these bad boys.
Always the same, again and again.
You know, again, yes. Well, but they have to begin to shine awareness. That's the work, to see that's what, you know, it's like, if I can get a bad boy to love me, well, then I must really be special. Right, right. And so this feeling of smallness, or this feeling of lack in me, it doesn't seem to free me with someone who's probably good for me and loves me.
Not interested.
I'm not interested. I'm going to go for that hard person that I want. And in fact, this is what a young woman said to me this week. I want to get that external validation from that male that's hard to get. Mm-hmm. And that's an addiction. That's what she keeps going for. Right. So you have to be able to say that and see that, and say, you know what, I don't want to live this way anymore. There has to be that feeling, enough, stop, no more. You don't hit bottom.
Exactly.
Some people never do,
Right.
but I think most people will,
They
and
do.
most people do.
Most people are struggling, trying.
Right. Then if there is a big me operating in intimacy, then I might want a feedback from, it doesn't matter if you're the bad boy or the good boy, or you might even be married to the good boy. But if you don't, at that point, validate me, the image that I have of myself,
Mhm.
then I may get angry, or I may begin to question this intimacy or this relationship that I'm in. I think that's what begins to make people start looking for other people to validate them, you know?
And you know, I was thinking also on a group level or on a national level, you know, having images about myself or even images about my group or my country
Yes.
leads you to be so easily manipulated, right? By people who are cunning enough to know that.
What do you mean?
Well, like I was reading in the paper today, India now has a prime minister who is stoking the nationalistic fervor
Mhm.
of the Hindus at the
Right.
expense of the Muslims.
Right.
And the country now is racked by this virus. So the prime minister, what does he do? He goes to the site of this mosque that was taken over by the Hindus and makes a huge ceremony of laying the cornerstone to make it a Hindu temple.
Yeah.
And of course, all the people were drawn to it and caught up with this nationalistic fervor, and stopped thinking about the virus and how it's being mishandled in the country and the number of dead that is stacking up, and the poverty that's it's kicking 100 million people out of work. So if you have an image that can be seized upon and manipulated, it works to the advantage of people who have a knowledge of that mechanism, and they can use it to lead the masses.
Oh, yes.
Sure.
Yes. So that's the influence.
Yeah.
Could you also speak a bit more about Krishnamurti's basic core precept about that each person, to change the world or to change even a little bit of society, each person has to change themselves first. It has to start with each person individually.
Correct.
Can you address that a bit more?
Okay, so he's saying, and he talks about that especially in violence, when he talks about violence, and I think maybe next week we're going to look at that. He's saying that the observer is the observed. So in other words, that me that sees violence outside of myself is the same me that sees violence inside myself. So that me is fear. That me is violence. And so he's saying, you've got to be able to end that in yourself. Yes, Paul just, he's saying, you are the world. The world is you. Because everybody, he's saying, on this planet does the same thing. They look outside and they don't see that the outer is the inner. And so they're not concerned with trying to change the inner as much as seeing what I can do about the outer. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do something about what's going on outside yourself. But that's not going to create a fundamental transformation. That fundamental revolution he's talking about. He's saying until we are able to end fear, and basically fear, and with that violence in ourselves, it's just going to continue. It's not going to end. So each of us has, he's saying, has the responsibility to see what's going on inwardly, and to see that when anger comes up, or jealousy, or greed, that's the me. And to be able to see it, to pull the plug on it, and to hopefully not continue it. If it comes up again, it comes up again, but to keep shining awareness on it until it finally dissipates itself.
So rather than rush off into acts of being a do-gooder that usually lead to more conflict in one way or another, he's saying start at home and clean up your own act. That's the best contribution you can make to contributing to lessening a survival mentality at work.
Yes, because he's saying society is made up of individuals. So start with the individual. And you know, the word individual means non-divisive. It means wholeness, not divided. But we live as individuals, divided, split up, or like, as he said, fragmented. And that fragmentation, he says, is what causes conflict. But forget about what he says. You can see it for yourself. Where there is division, there's conflict. That doesn't mean where there's difference, there's conflict.
Right.
Difference is fine. Difference is interesting. But division, which is coming from this separate self, this enclosed, separate self. And to be able to free ourselves from that.
So as we go about our relationships this week, whether intimate or cordial,
No, or otherwise.
intimate, cordial, or
Oh,
otherwise,
yes,
right?
yeah.
Whatever relationships we find ourselves, we can be on the lookout for the me in operation.
Right.
And that's where it comes, that's where the rubber hits the road, you know, when you're in having an interaction with someone, whether it's a partner or a friend or a store clerk or whatever. There's the grist for the mill right there. Especially when it doesn't go well, when an expectation isn't met or a frustration happens. Who shows up? Does my self-righteous me show up? My critical me? My blaming me? My fault-finding me? Who shows up at that moment?
I think it's also important to remember that when there is an awareness of the operation of the me, that there's no condemnation. Because if there is any kind of condemnation of that, then that's the me again operating. But when we see in the moment the awareness of the operation of the me, and there's silence, then that creates a spaciousness, an openness. And in that openness, you can begin to sense what's called timelessness or transcendence. Because remember, the me is of time, the me is of thought. Thought creates the me. Thought lives in the past or in the future. In the now, in this eternal now, there is no time. And when there is that sense of no time, there's a feeling of spaciousness and timelessness.
Well, let's meet next week and see where the path takes us.
I just wanted to say one thing, Evie. And where you have that spaciousness, then love can enter.
Yes,
Love can enter.
yes, yes.
With
That
that.
spaciousness, that spaciousness is love.
Exactly. Otherwise, if you don't have that spaciousness, there cannot be love.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. You got it.
Finally.
You got it.
It's so good to see you all.
Oh, you too.
Thanks again.
Okay, have a good week.
Thank you. We'll see you next week.
Okay.
Yes. Nice.
Bye-bye.
Buonasera.
Buonasera.
Au revoir. Bye.